The wind up here doesn't howl. It gnaws. I was riding the north fence of Granger Ridge, my ridge, when I heard it. Not wind. A sound thin as wire, a baby crying, then another, then a third. I swung down, led my horse, and followed that sound the way a thirsty man follows water. Snow took me to the ankle. The crying carried from the fence below the ridge. She was there. A woman tied to a fence post with barbed wire. Blood had frozen dark along her arms. One eye swollen shut. At her feet, God help me, 3 newborns wrapped in a ripped petticoat. Their mouths opened like little birds. Their skin wore that mottled blue that says the world is losing them. My name is Silas Granger. I'm no preacher or lawman. I was raised by a woman who mended a stranger's boot with her last thread, because last thread is still thread. I didn't ask a question. I pulled my knife. Don't move, I said. Frost rhymed the barbs. Every cut woke new blood. She flinched. Name? Maribel, she whispered. They came early. How long? Since last night. He left when the snow started. I bit that word like a nail. The last wrap fell, and she sagged. I caught her under the arms. She was light in the way of someone starved of warmth. I shrugged out of my coat and wrapped it around her, took my saddle blanket, and swaddled 2 of the girls. The third I tucked inside my shirt against my skin. She was the quietest. It scared me most. You're not dying here, I told her. Not any of you. The cabin sat a mile downslope if the drifts behaved, which they never do. I slung Maribel, belly down across the saddle, tied her hands gentle to the horn, set the other 2 in a grain sack I rigged like a sling, and started walking. Snow knifed my face, the horse blew steam and followed. I counted steps to keep fear quiet. At 50, I checked the girls' mouths. At 100, I pressed the quiet one tighter to my sternum. At 200, Maribel made a faint sound and went still. Men talk about courage like fire. Out there, it's stubborn ice that doesn't break. Jack pines showed dark through the white. My roof was a hump with a stovepipe like a finger of salvation. I booted the door, and the room filled with storm and us. I brought the fire up with pine knots, set iron on the stove, water in the iron. I warmed a spoon and dripped it on the baby's lips, rubbed their feet, blew across their fingers until color crawled back from blue to pink. One wailed. Another hiccuped. The quiet one squeaked, and I thanked every saint I don't believe in. Maribel tried to sit. I pressed her back. Welts and bites marked where the wire had argued with her. I cleaned what I could with whiskey and snow from the kettle. She watched me work like someone staring at a far shore. Why? She asked at last. Because they're worth everything, I said. And so are you. Outside, the storm piled against the door. Inside, the cabin took us in. I didn't know what name trouble would wear when it came looking. I only knew the line I wouldn't cross. I would not hand them back to a world that tied their mother to a fence post and called it justice. Not while I'm breathing on this ridge. Asterisk panic kills quicker than cold. I made the room small. Stove, table, bed, me. Everything else could wait. I set bricks by the fire to hold heat and laid the babies near them in a drawer lined with wool. The quiet one I kept against my chest because skin tells truth faster than blankets. I keep a milk cow through winter, a brindle named Mercy. I went to the lean-to, coaxed her with the last oat mash, and brought in a pail, steaming like a prayer. I boiled a strip of linen, tied it over a bottle mouth, and made a teat of it, slow drops for little mouths. 2 took to it with furious life. The 3rd fought and then sagged, eyelids fluttering like moth wings. I rubbed her heels and whispered, "The dumb promises men make when they don't know what else to do. Come on, little one." Maribel drifted between waking and the deep place where pain sleeps. I warmed whiskey, washed the wire cuts, picked rust from the worst places with a needle I'd boiled. When she bucked, I steadied her shoulder and talked, low about fence posts and calves and how winter always thinks it's the last word until spring proves otherwise. I stitched 2 gashes with horsehair, neat as boot soles. I hate sewing people. I did it anyway. She woke to her name when I said it. "Maribel, you're safe." Her good eyes shone. "Where?" "Granger Ridge, my cabin. The storm can throw itself bloody against the door. It won't come through." She licked cracked lips. The girls? Hungry and mad, which is close to healthy. I tipped a spoon to each. The quiet one finally suckled, then let out a breathy sound that almost counted as laughter. Something in my chest gave, like ice shifting on a river. Words came brittle from Maribel. "He said a son, or he'd send me back to dust." The midwife begged him. He wrapped the wire himself. She closed her eye. "Said a man doesn't waste food on 3 curses. The room went still. I have fury in me, like a stove's draft hidden until it takes. I kept my voice flat. "A man who says a thing like that ain't a man." She watched me, measuring what kind of promise sat behind the words. Joseph Quinn. He owns men the way he owns mules. The town listens. I don't. Silence sat with us like a 4th child. I fed the stove, banked the coals, set water to warm again. Snow huffed at the chinks in the logs. My mother used to say worth isn't granted by any mouth that can snatch it back. You make it with work and keep it with love. Her breath evened. I wrapped her ribs to keep the bruising from tearing more. She winced and then went heavy, the kind. I checked the girls, counted little rises, touched each palm to feel the curl. I don't know prayer, so I made one out of doing milk at first. Light, chip ice for clean water, boil more linens. Grind oats to weight the milk if their bellies ask. Before dawn the storm broke and moved on. I sat with a rifle across my knees and watched the door, because men like Joseph don't let the world be gentle if they can help it. I thought of what I'd told her worth everything, and felt that line set like a post hole in frozen ground. If he came for them, he'd find the mountain had a new answer. "Sleep," I told the room. "I've got you." Asterisk spring crept up the mountain. Drifts slumped, the creek spoke again. Inside, Maribel learned my shelves by feel, and the babies learned my voice. Hattie came the day, snow turned to needles of rain. I heard her whoop before I saw the Dunmar. "Granger," she called, and pushed in. She stopped at the sight. 3 bundles, a bruised woman, me with a spoon. "Lord alive, Silas," she said, and wiped her eyes. "You stubborn old ridge." I gave the short version. She listened, jaw set. When I finished, she put a hand to Maribel's shoulder, gentle as a breeze. "You're staying?" Hattie said. Not a question. Maribel nodded once. Hattie's gaze went to the window. "News," she said. "Joseph Quinn's flapping his gums in town, spreading lies that kill slower than bullets. Says you stole his wife and his get. Says you're keeping them to ransom. He's got 4 men riding the back country to fetch what he calls his property. The stove draft and me took. They find this ridge, they'll leave empty. Hattie slid 3 paper-wrapped cartridges onto the table point .5070s for the Springfield over my bed. For when Empty needs help, Maribel's hands trembled. "He'll take them," she whispered. "He'll make them pay for being born." "No," I said. It came out stone. Hattie nodded. "Sheriff's got spine, but not enough men. Make this place bristle." We stacked cordwood into a waist-high wall and packed the cracks with mud. I pulled the table to clear a lane from door to stove. I drilled 2 peepholes, strung a bell line from the chicken coop. The gentlest tug would ring it. I cut firing slots and saved the plugs. I laid out cartridges in neat rows. All the while the girls watched like solemn judges. One chewed her fist and smiled at Hattie. Hattie stuck out her tongue. The child answered with a smaller one and spit bubbles. Hattie laughed, then sobered. "Names?" she asked. "We haven't settled them," I said. Marabel touched each brow. "Rose, June, and the quiet one, Mercy." She glanced at me, shy and strong. "If that suits?" "It does," I said, and felt something land inside me with the sound of home. By evening the rain eased. Hattie stood in the doorway, hat low, rifle high. "They'll scout by moonlight," she said. "I'll ride a wide circle, stir dust somewhere else, make him guess wrong." "Hattie," I said. She looked back. "Thank you." She tipped 2 fingers. "Don't thank me for breathing." She was gone. Night pooled. I banked the fire and listened to the ridge. Maribel held Mercy against her ribs, the other 2 warm on her lap. "If he comes," she said, not looking at me, "and I tell you to hand us over to keep you safe, don't you listen." "I won't," I said. A willow scraped the eave. I checked the holes, the latch, the cartridges. My mother's words returned like water finding its bed. Worth is made in work and kept with love. I set my back to the door and laid the rifle across my knees. The bell did not ring that night, but the thought of it, the thin, bright note of a wire pulled by a man who called 3 daughters a curse, sang in my skull until dawn. The bell spoke like a struck glass one bright note, then silence that felt louder than gunfire. I eased the plug from the left firing slot and saw them. 4 riders in oilskin slickers, horses blowing fog, hat brims pulled low against a sky. The color of pewter. The lead man wore a black coat and a deputy's star he'd likely bought with a bottle. On his right, a tall one with a scar across his lip. On his left, a kid who couldn't shave yet, but already carried a Winchester, like it was permission. The 4th kept his face in a scarf. They stopped 10 paces from the door. I set the rifle on the table, where Maribel could reach it if the world turned quick, and stepped out barehanded. Snow hissed under my boots. I kept the door open so she could hear, and so I could hear the babies breathing behind me. "Morning," I said. "Mr. Granger," Black Coat said. "I'm here on Joseph Quinn's authority. You're keeping his wife. You're holding his children." He lifted a folded paper without offering it. "Marriage writ says what's his." "No paper says a person is property," I answered. "Not on this ridge. Not in any place that plans to look God in the eye." Scarlip's horse sidled. "We ain't here to argue philosophy." "Then don't." I stood with my hands where they could see them. "You're not coming through this door." The kid tried on a sneer and didn't know how to wear it. Law says she goes with her husband. What law? I asked. The one a bully draws in the dirt with a boot heel? I took one step down, slow as noon. If the sheriff sent you, where's his badge? That tin says you can polish a star. That's all. Black coat kept his face empty. Joseph wants what's his. Inside, something thumped one of the girls, kicking at daylight. I didn't turn. What Joseph wants and what's right are two different trails. I've seen where his leads. He flicked his eyes past me toward the door. You aim to raise another man's get under your roof? I aim to keep 3 children and their mother alive. I let the words sit. If Joseph Quinn wants to contest that he can do it in front of the sheriff with Hattie to speak for what town knows, and with me in the room to say what I found strung to my fence in the snow. Scarlett spat. You calling Mr. Quinn a liar? I'm calling him unfit to handle a match, much less a family. The scarfed one shifted, put a hand to his sidearm, then thought better. Black coat watched the ridge, the bell wire, the stacked cordwood. He saw the slots I'd cut and what they meant. He also saw my empty hands. You come out unarmed. He said, that reads soft. No, I said, it reads sure. Wind rattled the spruce. The men's horses pawed, wanting a different errand. The kid's nerve failed before his horse did. He looked away, cheeks flushed. Black coat folded. The paper back into his coat. We'll be back, he said. With Joseph. With someone to write the taking proper. You bring who you like, I said. Bring a preacher if he needs last words. His mouth twitched, not a smile. You talk like a man who's tired of living. I talk like a man who's done watching cowards make rules. I tipped my chin toward the door. There's a pot of coffee in there. It's for friends. You aren't. He turned his horse with a curt jerk. The others followed, iron ringing faint against rock as they took the lower trail. When they were far enough that only the bell wire sang a little in the wind, I let out the breath I'd been holding. Inside, Maribel stood in the shadow by the stove, the rifle snug to her shoulder, face pale, but eyes steady. Mercy slept crooked against her. Ribs. Rose and June dozed in the drawer, fists like curled leaves. What did they say? She asked. That they're coming back. I closed the door, set the bar. My hands shook only a little. Good. I prefer enemies I can count. She exhaled, a sound part relief, part sorrow. He won't stop. Neither will I said, and sat at the table, laid out cartridges in a row, not because I wanted the fight, but because some fights are the tax you pay for calling a place home. Outside, the ridge listened. Inside, we waited, not as prey, but as people who had already chosen the shape of their courage. Asterisk quiet came like different weather. The ridge shed ice, put on mud, and the creek found its voice. Inside, the cabin learned a rhythm. Dawn meant Rose announcing herself. Mid-morning belonged to June's kick-happy feet. Mercy woke soft and watched like a small judge. 3. Babies should have made chaos. They made order. Maribel's strength returned notch by notch. The wire marks faded, and her laugh came back in shy pieces. She moved among my things until they weren't mine broom where she liked it, coffee drinkable, quilts aired. We didn't name what we were. We just lived it. The world had tried to bury these children nameless in a snowbank. Names bind people to earth. That evening I clamped a juniper board to the table. Shavings sweetened the air. Maribel rocked the girls by the door. Creek talk drifted in. I sharpened my knives and set to carving. Rose stout as her voice, June with a small flourish, Mercy slower, the M rooted, and the CA cradle. When each name lived in the wood, I rubbed the plaques with tallow. Maribel pressed one to her cheek like greeting a newborn. No one ever wrote my girls, she said. Joseph told the preacher not to waste the ink. I inked them, I said, hanging the plaques above the drawer crib with square nails. The girls didn't know the honor, but the room did. We kept talk small the way June grunted in dreams, the way Mercy's eyes caught light. Some shadows we left. When night pressed in, Maribel sometimes touched the scar on her wrist and went quiet. And I'd stir the coals, though the fire didn't need it. A past won't pull up by the roots. You plant something stronger beside it. Work turned pleasant. I mended fence, she mended my shirt. We traded jokes like biscuits. She said I counted nails. I said she sang off key. She proved me wrong with a lullaby about wheat and summer thunder. The girls went boneless. So did I. I cut a cradle from pine that had waited 10 winters in the rafters, something patient to hold them. Tight joints, ash pegs, the ridge carved along the headboard. On the footboard, 4 figures holding hands, 1 tall, 1 woman, 3 small. When I set the cradle by the bed, Maribel let me see her tears. You keep putting the world back together with your hands. My mother taught me, I said. A thing isn't real until you make it with work. I tapped the wood. You and the girls are real. We didn't speak vows. We didn't need to. The cabin held wordless promises. Room where she liked it. Plaques catching low sun. The cradles rock, tapping a heartbeat into the floorboards. Outside, the ridge eased into warm days. Inside, we found the peace that comes after surviving. Toward week's end, a dark shelf built over the snow horns. Hattie rode up, rain on her. Hat brim. Haven't seen the men, she said, but Joseph's buying favors. When weather turns mean, men like him take it for a sign. We looked at the plaques, the cradle, the sleeping girls. Quiet had weight now, something worth stealing. I set a hand on the rifle and felt the cabin square its shoulders. Then we'll be ready, I said, and we won't be nameless. Asterisk weather turns mean when men do. The blizzard slid off the snow horns like a white animal, low and fast. By noon the spruce were hooped with ice and the wind had claws. Hattie rode in, face flayed red, and didn't waste words. 3 riders on the south draw, she said, 4th lagging. One sits a bay with a silver bridle. Joseph Quinn. Love's silver. I looked at the plaques on the wall, at the cradle, at Maribel's hands smoothing a blanket that didn't need it. Time, I said. Take the girls. To where? Town. Find the sheriff. Tell him Joseph came to finish. At crime, he started. Hattie, get her through the cottonwoods and keep low along the creek. Bell Lion will tell me if they try the coop. Maribel's chin lifted. I won't leave you. You aren't, I said, and put Mercy against her, tucked Rose and June into the sling we'd made from an old shawl. You're bringing back law. Hattie met my eyes. We'd played this out in talk, not because we wanted it, because you sand floors before the wedding, you ready a plan before the trouble. We'll be quick, she said, and swung up. I kissed each girl's brow. I wanted to tie them to me. With rope, I used trust instead. Go now. The door took them like a mouth-swallowing prayer. Snow shouldered the logs. I stuffed the stove to give the place a heart and slid the firing slot plugs loose. The bell tinked once, twice. Footfalls spooked the chickens. They thumped and settled. I went to the door with the rifle load. Joseph came up the path like a man certain the world owed him weather. The silver on his bridle threw little knives of light. 2 men hunched behind him, faces scarfed, eyes feral from cold. A third rode wide to the right, cutting angle. Joseph's hat brim was snow-crusted. He looked like a man who'd never been allowed to hear no. "Granger," he said, voice easy as a card sheet. "You've been keeping house with what belongs to me." "She doesn't," I said. "They don't." He looked past me like I was brush. "Where is my wife? Where are my children?" He spread his hands mock hurt. "I heard you carve names." "I didn't order any." "You don't order people," I said. He smiled without humor. "A man orders his life. I won't have it said Joseph Quinn breeds curses." Wind rode itself between us. I felt the ridge behind me, the cradle at my back like a line in the dirt you can't see but can step over only once. "I found your wife wired to a fence in a storm," I said. "I found what you called curses. I called them daughters. That's the difference between us." He flicked 2 fingers. The wide rider shifted, angling toward the lean, to where Mercy the cow stood. In her shelter, men like Joseph don't mind killing what keeps others alive. I lifted the rifle. "Call him back." He hesitated, new to the idea someone else could give him orders. He whistled. The rider eased back. "You can't keep them," Joseph said. "You're a ridge with a stove. I'm a man with land and men. Land doesn't make a father." I said, "Work does. Love does. You have neither." His eyes went small and mean. "You call me loveless? I love the idea of a son. The world owes a man an heir." "The world owes you nothing," I said. He drew quick. I drew quicker. The first shot took his hat brim and scalped snow. The second broke the scarfed man's wrist before his pistol cleared leather. The third, mine, hit the bell wire and set it singing Wild the Choir to wake the valley. Joseph fired into the doorframe, splinters leaping. I backed inside, made the doorway my fort, counted their nerves. "Granger," he shouted, "you think law will side with a hermit against me? I think law will side with a woman tied to a fence," I said, and shot the ground by his bay's hooves, making the animal dance. The rider right spurred, and I put a .50 through his saddle horn. He reeled, swore, reconsidered living. Joseph lowered, sighted, and fired. Heat stitched through my shoulder, a hot hand grabbing muscle. I dropped to a knee and tasted iron. The stove ticked. The cradle creaked. I stood because the room asked me to. "Last chance," Joseph said, breath pluming. "Bring them out. I'll be generous and only take what's mine." I laughed, ugly. "You already took what was yours. The town will hear what and how. Hooves, more than 3. A woman's yell that carried like a church bell. Hattie. Then Joseph Quinn. That was Sheriff Talbot. Voice like oak. 5 riders slid out of the White Stars proper on their chests. Rifles already telling truth. Joseph wheeled, then froze as barrels found his middle. Hattie rode straight at the scarfed man and plucked his pistol from the snow with her stirrup. Like a trick she'd been born knowing. Talbot didn't waste his breath on speeches. "Joseph Quinn, I'm arresting you for attempted murder, assault, and cruelty that makes my stomach sour. Hands." Now, Joseph's men found their wisdom. They let pistols drop heavy. Joseph stared at me as if his hate could carry a bullet, farther than a gun could. "This isn't done," he said. "It is," Talbot replied, and had him bound before the echo stole back into the pines. Maribel came around the sheriff, shawl pulled close against the babies and the gale, eyes bright with fear and fury and something that looked like the first hint of rest. She slid off the mule Hattie had lent and crossed to me fast. "Silas, I've had worse splinters," I lied, feeling the hot weep of my shoulder. The girls blinked at the noise and then at me, as if to ask whether the world was finished shaking. "It's done," I told them, voice steadier than my legs. The worst part, anyway. Maribel stood so near that snow melting off her shawl tapped my boot. "You sent me to bring back law," she said softly. "I brought back enough." Asterisk the ridge learned to breathe without flinching. Sheriff Talbot hauled Joseph and his men to town in irons and made a point of stopping by 2 days later to say it loud on my doorstep so the spruce could hear. Charges filed, magistrate set to ride circuit when roads clear. Hattie stayed long enough to make soup that tasted like getting your name back, then rode out to spread the simple truth. Maribel Quinn was nobody's property, and 3 little girls were a blessing a community would answer to. We didn't celebrate. We repaired. I planed a fresh threshold where Joseph's bullet chewed the jam. Maribel stitched my shoulder with prettier work than I'd managed on her, then scolded me for bleeding on the good quilt, and laughed to take the sting out. At dusk I carried the cradle to the door and rocked it with my boot while the girls studied. The world beyond, a blue evening, a creek shining like a road somewhere kind. When a peddler's wagon bogged in our ford, I waded out with a fence rail for a lever and brought him in dripping. Maribel pressed a hot mug between his numb hands and tucked a blanket around shoulders that had learned too many winters. We fed him and his mare, and the story spread faster and truer than Joseph's lies ever could, that Granger Ridge would share what warmth it had. Before long, travelers started finding us on purpose. Not many, enough to make the coffee pot feel useful. Maribel took to hospitality the way she took to breathing once the wire scars softened. She moved around the room with the girls tied close in their sling, shawl falling soft from her shoulders, voice low as creek water. She asked names. She learned where a man's boots had walked and where his heart had been bruised. Folks left, different than they arrived. So did we. I widened the cabin by 6 feet half, a winter's work. Peeled logs, dovetails tight, a window set to watch the cottonwoods. I cut pegs from apple wood and fixed a long bench under the new glass. In spring it would be a place for little legs to swing. On the day the roof went on, Hattie brought a jug and declared the house christened, slapping the ridgepole with her hat. We laughed until one of the girls hiccuped herself to sleep. There are promises you say out loud, and there are the kind you say with hands. I'd been carving on a quiet thing for weeks, evenings after the girls fell to dreaming, a shawl pin. From elkhorn with the ridge etched small, and threads I'd traded from the peddler, berry dyed and creek washed. On a Sunday with a sky so clear you could hear it, I handed Maribel a bundle. Inside lay a wool shawl I'd made clumsy by lamp but sturdy borders stitched with rose, June, Mercy, and her own name between them, like a door the wind couldn't find. She touched the letters as if they were living creatures. Tears came and didn't scare her. "No preacher," she said, voice catching. "No white dress, no audience but the ridge," I answered. "Seems plenty." We stood by the doorway where the bullet scar used to be and said what we needed. "I'll carry when you can't. I'll listen when I want to speak. I'll never let them feel small." She told me I had a way of making the room the size it ought to be, even when fear tried to make it small. We didn't swap rings. We traded the quilt we slept under and the work it takes to keep it warm. That night, guests ate biscuits at our table. Hattie, the peddler passing back through, 2 sheepherders with faces weather carved. After, I lifted the plaques from above the drawer and hung them on the new wall, right where morning would lay first light. Rose, June, Mercy. The girls slept through the honor. The adults did not. Hattie wiped her eyes and swore at me for making her do so. "You soft-hearted fool," she said, smiling. "Look what you went and did made a house into a place. We kept the door barred at night and the rifle nearby. The past doesn't vanish. It becomes a teacher or a chain. On our ridge, it would be the first. When the wind combed the spruce, we let it. When strangers knocked, we fed them. Between those acts, we raised 3 little girls in the faith that a man's worth was the way he held a baby, the way he mended a hinge, the way he refused to sign his name to harm. Asterisk spring didn't arrive with trumpets. It came on bare feet. Snow sank into the creek until it spoke in silver, and the meadow below the cabin put on its first green like a shy dress. The girls turned one by the calendar's guess, and by the way their hands grabbed everything the world offered. Rose learned to declare the morning. June learned the art of throwing food with purpose. Mercy learned to stare down the sun itself and make it blink first. We set a quilt on the stoop and let the day do the rest. Maribel sat with her shawl, our names, stitched around her like a fence you don't see until you try to cross it. She laughed more now, the kind that starts low and lifts a room. I cleaned my rifle less and oiled the cradle more. The ridge stayed, ready because that is its nature. But we'd learned the difference between readiness and fear. Travelers still found us. Some came for coffee, some for listening. A sheepherder left a sack of seed and a story about his mother's apron. A teacher bound for a 1-room school brought a slate for the girls and the news that Joseph Quinn had stood in court with nothing to say that didn't curdle. The circuit judge wrote the simple sentence the land had been waiting for. A wife is not property. A child is never a curse. Hattie swore she saw the saloon's clock stop and start again on that word never, dug a square of earth by the cottonwoods, and planted an apple sapling we'd traded off the peddler. The girls watched me tap the dirt with both hands like I was tucking in a friend. "Takes time," I told them, "but time's what we have if we share it right." Maribel set the watering pail down and leaned against my shoulder, and we let silence tell us yes. I found the coil of barbed wire I'd saved from the fence where I cut her free, the same wire I had kept to remember the line I'd drawn. I buried it under the apple's roots, not to forget, to feed something worth more, When I patted the last of the soil flat, Mercy clapped as if I'd performed a miracle. Maybe I had. Maybe we all had. Nights we left the door open to the screen and let the creek's talk be our hymn. I whittled a little house from scrap pine, 4 tiny figures on the step, a dog we didn't own, yet sleeping like a comma. Maribel traced the ridge line I carved along the roof. You made the mountain smaller, she said. No, I told her. We made ourselves bigger. We took our vows again without saying so. Mine went like this. I will sharpen plow blades and listen when the sharpness is in your voice instead. I will hold the girls when they are sick and hold my tongue when I am. I will remember that the worst thing the world did to you is not the most important thing about you. Hers sounded like this. I will fill this room with the smells of bread, and then let you be the one who burns the first loaf without shame. I will teach the girls to braid their hair and never braid their choices. I will hold the door open for people who carry storms and send them out lighter than they came. Bluebirds nested in the eave. Hattie carved her initials in the new bench and pretended it was vandalism so I wouldn't make a speech about family. Sheriff Talbot rode up once a month and stayed for pie. He'd look at the girls and wipe his boots twice before crossing the threshold, as if clean steps could make the world cleaner. The mountain kept its stray dangerous cougar sign in the draw, a late frost that tried to take the garden and didn't. We met them with the plain religion of work. Every now and then I'd see a woman ride the road with her jaw set too tight, or a boy with shoulders that had learned to flinch, and I'd hand them coffee or a job or a place to sit until the day loosened. That's the law I keep. If peace found us here, it's got plenty to spare. One evening, with the girls asleep 3 different wrong ways in the cradle, and the apple tree drawing a green question against the dusk, I took Maribel's hand and we stepped into the yard. The ridge breathed, the fence line ran true. The door stood open like a promise we meant to keep. We didn't say we were happy. We said we were home, which is the only word I've found that holds both the fire and the hands that feed it.